everybody. Welcome this Tuesday evening here in South Africa to Rebellious Ruth. And I'm so glad to have with me, he's just come into the picture, Chris Wyatt, Colonel, forgive me, Chris Wyatt. So welcome, Chris. Colonel.
Hey, Ruth. How's it? How you doing today?
No, we're good. It's been back to the grindstone, all well. Don't know if it's the Rona, sort of long lasting, but gets the days long. But yes.
So well, I'm kind of with you there. Again, as I've said famously on my channel, first off, so that people know whether it works or not, I do identify as vaccinated, just so people know that. But of course, with my illness, which tested negative multiple times for the bug Rona, one thing I've definitely noticed is that whatever illness that I had, whether it was that or not, with whether it false negatives, is that the road to recovery, I find myself, and it might also be because I'm out of shape now because I haven't exercised in a month for the most part, but I find myself winding down and running out of energy, even though I've recovered late in the day. It's getting better as the days go by, but for the past week or plus, I've found that it's a challenge to want to get out of bed. And I'm a person that's thrilled to get out of bed every morning and attack the day. And also I'm a person that's not big on naps, but I'm enjoying naps here between events. So whatever's going around and coming around, it definitely, it kind of hits you hard, even if you are mildly hit by it. I would argue that given the fact that whatever I had, if it was the Rona, I didn't lose my sense of taste, my sense of smell. I never had a temperature ever. In fact, the worst day I felt when I went to the clinic, my temperature was 98.7, which is normal Fahrenheit. I never had runny nose, never had nasal congestion, never had a single headache, never had muscle aches, never had any of that stuff, never had vomiting, which are all, of course, symptoms of the bug. But I did have chest difficulty breathing, a cough eventually, and initially some trots, but I think the trots were unrelated because doxycycline cleared that up. So anyway, so it was a weird situation, but I'm back on the mend, and I'm sure that we want to talk about much more interesting things than the trots.
Yeah. No, look, you might enjoying naps you might be identifying as for the feline variety.
Well, yeah, I used to have cats, and boy, they sleep a lot. They just lie around all the time. They are something else. They are something else. Cats, I think, spend 70% of their time resting or something like that. Yeah.
And then at night they're awake and they play with your feet or jump on your head or do all sorts of crazy things.
Or tear up your couch.
Yeah, or your curtains.
Oh, curtains! They love that too. Yep.
So I just want to say hello to all the people, to Hendu, Nick Mueller, all your guys are with us. Thank you so much. Buzzy Moments, Cameron Heslop, Nick Mueller, Roy, JC, Buzzy, Lynn. Yes, so welcome to tonight. So I just wanted to pick your brain a bit, or you just sort of give over information about the Middle East in general, the geographical, political sort of. I mean, I know we can discuss modern Israel, which is sort of 1948 to current, but there's also stuff prior. So any knowledge you're willing to impart on that would be greatly appreciated, because I think there's a lot people don't know. Also, you speak about your anti-terrorism, your training, sort of touch on that with regard to the Middle East. I mean, I know you were talking about how they now are acknowledging that the Taliban are now are considered a non-terrorist organization, which to me is balmy.
Well, did they actually say that? I haven't seen them state that. The official designation from the Department of State is they're a terrorist organization, and they have been for over 20 plus years, since back in the late 1990s. I don't know if the State Department has changed that, or it's simply a question of the Biden administration negotiating with terrorists, which is what I think they're doing. I haven't seen a public announcement retracting that.
Okay, fair enough. But I think each to their. I mean, there's so many narratives, especially that this country has as well. South Africa are very, very, let's say, amicably in touch with the terrorist organizations, or what should I say, communities in this country. They have a lot of affiliation with them. So yeah, hi Teresa. All right, so where do you want to start?
Well, I suppose we start with the following: is that As a historian, I prefer to look at facts and, of course, offer analysis, but the facts don't always help each side, and just putting things in perspective. So, for instance, just before we get onto the Middle East, South Africa's first official census was in 1911. And in 1911, nearly 22% of South Africans were white, which is a figure that's lost on people. Everyone thinks that whites have always been a very tiny minority in South Africa. But back in 1911, there were 1 out of 5 people were white. Black Africans only made up about 60% of the population, less than 60% between coloreds and Indians who were there at the time. So that fact doesn't sit well with some people. It doesn't sit well with other people. So when I mention that, it's because of the diaspora, because of Jews being chased out of the Holy Land for millennia. What happened was that very few Jews actually lived in what is today Israel and what was considered or called Palestine at the end of the Ottoman Empire. So if we go back to 1920, when the Brits took over in Palestine, there weren't that many Jews there. There were only 5,000 or so living there. But the total population was really small, but they were a very distinct minority there. Now, that doesn't abrogate the Jewish right of a state to exist or for Jews to consider it their home. It's just a statement of fact. Now, some people don't like that. Today, over 73% of all the residents of the 9+ million people living in Israel are Jewish, and they come from all over the world. The early days after the Second World War, the large influx was the Ashkenazim, who came in mostly from Europe. Those who survived the Holocaust, about 700,000 Jews made it in the 3 years after the Second World War to what became Israel, despite the fact that the Royal Navy from Britain was blockading and stopping and putting them in Cyprus and in detention camps and basically concentration camps. That's a horrific story, but a true. But despite that, about 700,000 got in that period. And as a consequence, a significant percentage of today's Jewish population in Israel is from the Ashkenazim. That's who they are. And if I mispronounce it, Ashkenazi. Thank you. I'm a little bit off my game here, and as opposed to the Sephardic. And there's a distinction for those who don't know about Judaism. These are largely, generally speaking, those who were Jews in Europe, and a lot of them look just like any other European, blue eyes, blonde hair at times, and they're Jewish. And the more traditional view that some people have of Jews who typically come from Spain or North Africa or later Ethiopia, but Spain, North Africa, especially in the Middle East, who are more olive skin color people, darker complexion, brown eyes, that sort of thing. And so Jews look like everybody. They're black, they're white, they're brown, they're olive skin. And I think that's lost on a lot of people, but that's a consequence of the spread of the religion as it went out from the Holy Land back in the day, many, many thousands of years ago. But I think it's just important to point that out because the percentage of Jews in Israel today has dropped from over 80% in recent history to 73%, in large measure for two reasons. One, there's fewer and fewer immigrants coming to Israel who are Jews because most of them who are going to go there have gone there over the last 6 decades. And there aren't large reservoirs of Jews that are being persecuted or can't make a living that are headed there. We've already seen the evacuation or the departure of hundreds of thousands of Jews from Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia in particular to Israel back in the 60s and 70s. We've seen, of course, all those come from Europe in the end of the World War II, who relocated to Israel. We've seen a mass migration of Russian Jews, over 1 million and 1.4 million from 1990 till about 2004. Huge influx of Russian Jews. And then we've also seen the Ethiopian Jews come, 130,000 of them. So you'll hear Amharic, Russian, Yiddish, German, English, all spoken on the streets of the major cities of Israel. It's quite a cosmopolitan country, but it's important to note that today's Jews in Israel come from all kinds of sources, and they're incredibly diverse from their origins in the worldview, from its Hasidic Jews or ultra-conservative to your almost secular Jewish population. And I don't know if I've misstated anything there or you find anything correct, but let me know if you did, Ruth.
No, I think you've pretty much summed it up. It is a wide, definitely cosmopolitan area. And what's so incredible, even geographically, you've got the metropolis, the city, the Tel Aviv, that doesn't sleep at night. It's almost like a mini New York. And then you've got your Jerusalem, old city, where if you walk through the streets, it's like you're in a large movie set going back to like Crusades. And then you go north and it's beautiful trees and forests. And then you go east. It's actually amazing. It's almost like the 4 corners of the world compacted into one. And like I say, there are people all over. I mean, they're Yemenites, they're Svardis, they're people from all over that region to it's actually incredible, and I really encourage everyone who hasn't been to put it on their bucket list. I think everyone has to experience Israel, whether you're doing a pilgrimage for Christianity or Islam or Judaism. You have to go. It's just
absolutely. I've been to Jerusalem. In fact, I lived in Israel for 4 months in the summer of 1992. As part of a military operation, working with the Israeli Defense Forces deep in the south, in the Negev, close to the Sinai there, not too far from Eilat. It was a pretty incredible experience. I really enjoyed it. We got to the Dead Sea. The one place I didn't get to go was up on Masada. We drove by it several times, but never really had the time because it takes a lot of time to go up there. But we went to Bethlehem, we went to Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, all over the country as part of our time there. It is an incredibly amazing, geographically diverse country. Something really else. But I should also point out that Israel is not the world's largest Jewish state, not even close. Well, it is getting close now because the 73%, so about 6 million. But the United States is the world's largest Jewish state with 9 million Jews living in America, which I don't think most people know. We have a very large Jewish presence in this country.
Yeah, in America, I think only now in the last few years has America lost its majority with regards to a Jewish. I think a lot of them were in New York City, and then obviously California. Yep. But yeah, I think I still believe people don't know, especially in South Africa, what a typical Jew. There is no such thing as a typical Jew. Yes, you get your Hasidic, which is your very, your black hat, your twirly pieces. Yes, the tassels that they wear. I mean, that's a sect of Judaism that they sort of a cultural, what should I say, almost way of life that they live. That's their decision. It's not all Jews look like that. In fact,
no, not even remotely. In fact, no. Ruth, I had no idea you were Jewish until you mentioned it on a stream. Well, how would I know that? Well, I don't know your surname, so that doesn't help. And married or not, I don't. So I mean, sometimes surnames give people away, right? But appearances, no. I mean, you look at people who are Jewish and they're in Hollywood and they play Arabs and Muslims because they can't.
And I know, and even what's his name, the guy that played the pianist, 10 points to anyone who gets this. And I know Brett's spoken about a couple of good points he's raised. But yeah, the pianist, what's his name? He's got a prolific Semitic nose, but he's not even Jewish. He's actually Italian. I'm trying to think of his name.
That's the hazard of appearances. We had a famous commercial here in America in the 1970s about the crying Native American. They were showing, it was an anti-pollution video trying to get people not to pollute. And you have this guy who canoes and he's got buckskin on, he's got a long nose and a long profile, and he looks like a Native American Sioux or something like that. And he's actually an Italian American.
Yeah.
He's not even Indian.
Yes, no, I think, there we go. Joking Atheist is here. Yes, Adrian Brody. There we go. Yeah, okay, he's one of my favorites. Yeah, it's incredible. He plays so much. I think he was even in, what's it? Not Terminator. I'm going to kill myself. No, I'm not. Predator. He was even in one of the last Predator.
Oh, in Predator. Okay.
Yes, he played, when they all land on that planet and they have to kill each other in order to survive, or they get hunted. But yes. All right. So let's go back to the history. Mm-hmm. So we've discussed obviously the people and what it's like now. Mm-hmm. Do you want to go back as far as the Crusades? Like obviously,
we could do that. Israel, that's all the way back.
Yeah, Israel. Well, it wasn't Israel then. It was Judea, I think. Mm-hmm. Yep. Judea, Samaria, which was, I think, mostly ruled. I'm trying to look. My history is not so great, but I mean, you're talking the Hellenistic Alexander, and then the Crusades came way after. 3, 4.
But before you even get to the Crusades, the one thing that had the most devastating impact probably on the Jewish community and its prominence and preeminence in what is Israel today is the Roman Empire. The Romans were particularly horrific. They tried to wipe Jews out endlessly, chased them from there, and it led to early diaspora for people fleeing from there and Jewish communities being established elsewhere. But that's probably the thing. Now, the Crusades, Jews who were there weren't a lot of them, but they were caught in the crosshairs, even though they weren't really part of it. This was an effort by Christians to retake Jerusalem, which is considered the holy city of Christianity. And some of it was exploitive. Some of it was genuine religious fervor. Some of it was well-intentioned. Some of it was just exploitation and colonization. And we saw Christian states in the Holy Land for centuries. We had Acre, which was a huge run by, and then so what happens is the Crusaders were French, they were German, they were English. And so you have French-speaking kings and German-speaking kings of holy states in the Holy Land. But eventually Saladin and others came and pushed the Christians back out of there. But it was not a good time for anybody, whether you were Druze, whether you were Jewish, you were Christian, not a good time, or Muslim, because of all the constant conflict for centuries there. But we could probably jump ahead from that and get to more modern history. In the late 19th century, with a very small population of Jews in the area, the Zionist movement, if you will, sort of gained fervor, particularly in Europe. And this was an effort for people to return to the Holy Land, for Jews to come back to the place of their origin, from their history saying it was the place of their origin. And so you started to see numbers of Jews migrating to what was considered Palestine, but it was part of the Ottoman Empire at that time in the 1880s and 1890s. And then they were increasing in numbers, and it wasn't much friction going up. A little bit of trouble between Arab and Jewish communities, but not much. Now, it's interesting I say Arab because that's an ethnic designation, but some Arabs are Christians and Maronites and also Druze, and that's why it's important to say Arab rather than just say Muslims, because you get that mix. Anyway, so what happens is that the French and the English totally screw up the Middle East and create the problems we have today with the Pico-Sykes Agreement during the First World War, which is an agreement in which they drew lines on the map and created the modern map of the Middle East with Kuwait and Syria and Iraq and the boundaries. And all of this created the tensions. Now, could have been done differently? Sure. But that really is the point. So the French and the British are the ones that really got all of us stuck in this Middle East nonsense at the end of the First World War, or during the First World War at the end of it. So, of course, famously, the British sent troops to fight the Ottomans and to equip and train and use the Arab guerrillas from Saudi Arabia and from Jordan to attack the Ottoman supply lines. And, of course, this is where you get Lawrence of Arabia from. He was a British officer who was responsible for coordinating a lot of this activity and harassing the Ottomans. Eventually, the Ottomans were pushed back. The First World War ends. And now what do? There's no Ottoman Empire. We have these sort of new proto-states in the Middle East. And the British government came out with something called the Balfour Declaration, in which they supported the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine. That led to internecine conflict in Palestine from about 1920 to 1938, in which all kinds of nasty things happened by all parties. And then what happens from there is that the Second World War comes. And of course, we're all familiar with the Holocaust and the horrific things that happened to the Jewish community of Europe, and which is unfathomable for many people. And I can't believe that people actually deny the Holocaust. They're just supposed to be absolute lunatics. That's like denying the Rwandan genocide of 1994. We have unbelievable evidence that it's there, and I don't understand. These are people that just really have issues. But anyway, so the Holocaust, at least 6 million Jews are murdered by the Nazi regime or die as a consequence of their actions in Belarus, in Ukraine, in Poland, in Germany, throughout Europe, the Netherlands. Jewish populations are decimated. At the end of the war, the pre-war population of Jews was probably around 8 million in Europe, and it was less than 2 million at the end of the war. It's amazing that even 2 million of them managed to survive, given the circumstances. But what happens is that because of the collective guilt of the Western powers in Europe and the world leaders, there was a movement fostered by the Brits to get support for the legitimate creation of a Jewish state in Palestine. And what they decided on is they created a map, and the United Nations approved this, and the United Nations accepted Israel as a member state, I think in 1949. And
by one vote, was it?
I don't recall. You may be right. I don't recall the number of votes.
Was
but
it the Balfour Declaration? I think the independent. It was down by one vote.
It may have been. I don't recall. But the bottom line is the United Nations accepted Israel. So when the United Nations sanctions Israel for recapturing territory that was lost to it as a consequence of the multiple wars, the United Nations are just a bunch of hypocrites. They're the ones that approved Israel. And the map of Israel that was created in the 1940s is almost identical to the map of Israel today, with the exception of the West Bank, which is controlled by the Israelis as a consequence of the 1967 Six-Day War. But the conflict started immediately. Horrific conflict between Arabs and Jews in 1948. War crimes, crimes against humanity, murders, rapes, lynchings. It's just horrific stuff that happened on all sides. And of course, to be fair, many of the early Israeli leaders were terrorists. Those who rose to fame, prime minister and generals of the army and such, they committed terrorism in the 1940s and 1950s as this got solved. But eventually, things settled down a bit. The Israeli government is controlling it. And then we have this attack in 1956 when the Arab states attack Israel. And then in 1967, as things are headed in the direction where the Arab states are once again plotting to attack Israel, the Israelis do a preemptive attack and destroy all the Arab air forces on the ground within 2 or 3 hours at the start of the war. And therefore, they have unrestricted control of the skies for the Six-Day War, and they just roll over everybody. They roll over the Sinai, they roll into Egypt, they roll over the Golan Heights. They take it from Syria, they take the West Bank from Jordan, and suddenly these guys are in control of everything. And 67, of course, sets the stage for so much that comes after that. In 1973, the Arabs, in a fit of juvenile delusion, decide to attack Israel again. They do it on one of the most important holidays, Yom Kippur. And when most forces are off and people aren't there, this is one reason why Israeli soldiers are required to have their weapon 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Because, if someone invades America, we've got strategic depth. We can retreat. There's no strategic depth in Israel. I mean, you can drive across the Negev in a couple of hours. And so if Israelis aren't ready to be attacked at any moment, the country could be lost just like that. So Yom Kippur War was almost a disaster for Israel. They were in real trouble. They managed to regroup and push back. And that was the last major war between the Arab states and Israel. Israel was always considered the underdog and wildly popular and got endless support in the United States by left and right until Israel invaded Lebanon in the early 1980s. When Israel invaded Lebanon, what happened was the view of Israel as the underdog, as the defender, was switched in the mind of many liberals who found it convenient to now call the Israelis apartheid state, and they call the Israelis the aggressors, completely ignoring the fact that they were firing rockets from the Bekaa Valley into Jewish settlements in Israel, murdering civilians on a daily basis. Some action had to be taken. Whether it was an invasion of Lebanon or not, I don't know if that's the right answer. But the bottom line is this, is that Israel was defending its citizens by invading Lebanon. And ever since then, Israel has been attacked endlessly by the United Nations, by leftists around the world, and by the people who supposedly care about Jews, the political left. They don't. They're just liars.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. That's, very, I think it's important to note, and I think it's so important for people like you to stand up and have a voice, and because you've experienced things in Israel, you've heard both sides of the stories. You're not particularly, I think, pro any side. I think you're very fair in your judgment. I want to ask the viewers, is there anything that they think that they know about Israel or have heard about Israel that we can either try and iron out, like maybe, or they didn't know about Israel? Maybe there's something. I know Brett's also very active. As usual.
Yep.
Talking, I think there was a question for you further up, also from Brett. The Lawrence Arabia guy was a Zionist and an Arab nationalist. Is it possible to be both? He trained Arabs to rebel against the Ottoman Turks.
Well, I suppose you could be both if you support both groups, but their interests are diametrically opposed. But that doesn't make an impossible contradiction. I don't know that Lawrence Arabia was a Zionist. I was unaware of that, but I suppose he is, But he definitely was an Arab nationalist. I mean, he wanted independence for Arab states, and that's why he was there and trying to help the Arabs. And that's the whole thing. As far as his views in Israel, I'm not familiar with his views in Israel. But if he was a Zionist, I could see at that time in history how that wouldn't necessarily be a contradiction in his mind, because the whole area is occupied by the Ottoman Empire, and you're trying to help peoples escape the yoke of Ottoman rule, and that's Arabs and that's Jews as well. So, yeah, I could see that, Brett, but I didn't know that was the case. That's kind of news to me. But it's interesting, Ruth, because I did a video, and I think the reason it was banned, I was removed on YouTube and given a warning, is because I threw the T word in there talking about the Palestinian Authority and explain that. So I'm not going to do that. But in that video, I was simply talking about factual information about Israel because it was being called an apartheid state by members of the EFF in South Africa. And I said, if you think Israel is an apartheid state, then you don't understand what apartheid is. Either the right view from the National Party, which said it's simply separate development, which is may have been the origins of it, but that's not the reality of it. It was racial discrimination. Anyway, but so whether it's that view or it's the leftist view that anything that doesn't go your way is apartheid. But the bottom line in Israel is that any Arab who lives in Israel can be part of the government, can serve in the military, can serve in the Knesset, which is their parliament. We've had 89 Arabs who've served in the Knesset since 1948. Yes. Now, about 40% of them have been Muslims. Whoa, how do you do that in an apartheid state? We have had generals at the lieutenant general rank in the Israeli Defense Force who are Arab Muslims. Now, how does that happen? And no one is prevented. The only thing that I'm aware of, and I could be wrong about this because I've had conflicting research on it, but as I understand it, only Jews can own land in Israel. I don't know if that's true because I've seen conflicting information, but I think that's the case.
As far as I'm aware, no one actually owns land in Israel. Well, okay, I have to do my research, but they do what the Brits do. They do 100-year lease term. I can't think of the property rights now, but basically it's like a freehold lease. You have a freehold lease for 100 years. Okay. Whether that term comes to renew it, I'm not sure. I know the British do this as well.
I was unaware that Britain does it. That's shocking. People have owned land for thousands of years.
In some places, Britain does it. I don't know in all of it, but I think because of the old castles and the old dwellings and the old manor homes, but I could be misinformed. I don't know if things have changed. I know with the new politicians coming into play, things are changing all the time. That's what's so incredible about Israel. It never sort of stands still.
But the thing in Israel that people have to remember is that it's not simply a country of Arabs and Jews or Muslims and Jews. There's Maronites, there's Druze Christians, there's Christians, there's Druze, there's lots of people there. And also there's probably about 230,000 illegal migrants from Africa, from South Asia, and from other places who've flooded into Israel because Israel has the current situation aside with the Rona, Israel has a dynamic, vibrant, highly advanced technical economy. For instance, just a few things off the bat, Hotmail invented by Israelis. In fact, it came to be a problem for me because in 2001, when I was in Tunisia, I had a Hotmail account and suddenly I couldn't access my Hotmail account anymore. Why?
No, because Tunisia doesn't recognize.
Well, but Tunisia didn't realize that the Hotmail program was run by Israelis. They thought it was an American thing. So they started blocking. Then they started blocking shortly after that all emails. So I couldn't even get to my Yahoo and my Excite accounts because since they're like, wait, we can't trust this. They must all be run by the Jews, So they shut it all down. But Hotmail was eventually bought by Microsoft, and the list goes on and on. The pioneer in remotely piloted vehicles or drones, UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, Israel. When I worked with unmanned aerial vehicles back in the late 1980s in the Army as an intelligence officer, we were building the Pioneer. Well, the Pioneer was based off a design from Israeli drones that had been used for a decade. Israel is a highly technical company. They're advanced in genetics. They're advanced in medicine. They're advanced in telecommunications. It's an amazing country that has faced an onslaught from the world and from its neighbors. It hasn't always made the right decisions, but we all make mistakes. And the fact that the world is continuously attacking Israel is one of the reasons why I'm such a staunch supporter of Israel, because I prefer the truth.
Okay, fair enough. It's like that. I don't know if it's such a joke, but I don't know if you know about the man that saved the child from the dog, right? This vicious dog attacked this child, right?
Okay.
And he's a foreigner. He was wearing a backpack. Not many people knew. The news wanted to interview him. He had a low profile. He didn't really want to say who he was and where he was from. He's like, it's fine, don't worry. And eventually, after getting much, hounded, and they got hold of his passport, eventually some guy snuck into his room and, oi, what is he? He's from Israel. The next headline in the newspaper says, Israeli kills dog. Instead of like all the praise, yeah, man, foreigner saves child, woo, woo, woo. front page news for a week. And then as soon as they find out he's Israeli, evil man kills dog.
Yeah, no, that's the problem. But I mean, we see that globally. We also see that here in America when people attack conservatives. It's the same narrative, the same nonsense. But the impact of that statement is far more damaging than attacking conservative in the U.S. This is a big country and it's a big world, and not everybody falls for it. But Israel, people for some reason want to look at Israel and see it as an aggressor because of the endless false media coverage. When the Palestinians were launching rockets into Israel a few months ago, and the Israelis didn't respond for days, I mean, people were getting killed, and there was pressure on the government to respond. And then they finally responded. There was no mention that the Palestinians murdered innocent civilians for days before the Israelis responded, and that the Israeli response was not indiscriminate like the Palestinian response was, but rather targeted against government facilities and rocket launching sites. It's endless. When the Intifada started back years ago, that was wildly misread. How unfair it is for the Israelis are gunning down innocent people in the streets. Innocent people throwing bricks and rocks at people and murdering people with bricks and rocks are not innocent people. They are criminals. And they're insurrectionists, and it's just frustrating. But it's, for some reason, the world has gone down this path, and it's the wrong path, and we need to be honest about it. Ruth, what I don't understand, I don't get this. I don't get the pathological dislike or distaste for Jews. I don't get it. I'm not Jewish, so I really don't get it. We have it all around the world. We saw it here in Pennsylvania, where a synagogue was attacked, in Pittsburgh. I really do not get it. What do people have about Judaism and Jews that bothers them so much? I mean, it's crazy.
So I think the first thing that comes to mind is the fear of the unknown. I think it's like the village people who hear there's a wild beast who's attacking children. Oh, pitchforks, the ogre, we must go.
Must be the Jews.
And I think they don't know enough. I think, and I beg people, like I've said before, I mean, Israel is one of the only countries, look, I don't know now, obviously, with the Rona, but before, Israel didn't have a visa. Anywhere in the world, you could go to Israel and you didn't need a visa. I think after 3 months, you needed to apply for certain permits and things.
Sure.
But you could basically go there for 3 months and without a visa.
Well, I mean, if you go for 3 months, you're visiting. You go beyond 3 months, obviously you have another intention. So that's only reasonable. Yep.
Yeah. And to me, it was just such a mind-opening experience to go. And obviously I was gifted the chance to go. I went on a birthright tour. But also,
can you explain that for people who don't know what birthright tours are?
Okay, so there's certain organizations that obviously, I mean, they tried a lot. And like you said, there was a whole lot of Russian immigration after, I think, Gorbachev in the 80s or the early 90s.
Yeah, but it started about 1990. They started letting them out. Yep.
And that influx to Israel, they say a lot of them weren't even Jewish, but because they wanted to escape Russia and the communistic,
pretended to be Jewish.
Yeah, they pretended to be Jewish.
Well, it's a similar thing in Germany because they had the right to return to Germany if you had any German blood. And so hundreds of thousands of non-Germans who are mostly Russians claim that their great-great-grandfather's name was, Kleinschmidt or something like that. And so they couldn't speak German. They had no German ties. They're all Russian. They migrated to Germany. So Germany filled up with Russians. Now, some of them were ethnic Germans who had unbroken chains since Catherine the Great, but many of them weren't. So the same sort of thing happened. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. So, so a few of them came to South Africa. But if I can tell you, this one girl I knew, she was completely suppressed and almost backward. And it was so sad. I don't think they could make it in Israel. They just obviously thought South Africa was the land of dreams. And I hope it worked out for them. I don't know what you're drinking there, Chris. Are you also having a Red Bull?
No. I'm trying to be less white. I don't drink Coca-Cola. I'm drinking RC, Royal Crown Cola. So
okay.
What's good enough for other folks just ain't good enough for me and my RC.
Okay, great stuff. I guess that's the tagline.
It was many years ago. I don't think they don't advertise anymore, but yeah, that was the thing. It's older than Coca-Cola. It's been around longer. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, and a friend of mine told me, like, there was that whole thing in the papers when the media papers, listen to me, I sound so old age, papers about Ben and Jerry's. Okay. Now, Ben and Jerry's is actually a company that was developed by Jews. Okay. The factories are in the Palestinian territories or outskirts of the industrial area, which is where a lot of Palestinian homes are, okay, the settlements or part of the settlements, and by Hamas and the PLO, well, they don't really exist anymore, but
PLA, Palestinian Authority. Yep.
Yeah. Boycotting Ben and Jerry's, what they intrinsically doing, it's like this government stopping the restaurants from trading alcohol. You're closing down or limiting those families who work in the factories that happen to be Palestinian or non-Israeli. You're giving them, you're taking away their income, right? So the logic is crazy. Right.
There's no logical reason, but for clarity, Ben & Jerry's is an American ice cream company not owned by Ben & Jerry. They sold it off to one of the big names years ago. Yeah, they're both Jewish, but most of us look at them as 1960s hippies that never grew up because of the way they dress and they behave. They're very famous for their ridiculously odd flavors like Chunky Monkey and things like that. I haven't had Ben & Jerry's for a while. It's pretty good. It's from Vermont on the East Coast. And what you're talking about is that I think they're owned not by Parmalat, but one of those big companies bought them many, many years ago. They had a factory there making it, and they put it in the Palestinian Authority to benefit Palestinians. And then people boycott it because the face of it's two Jewish dudes. That's just cutting off your nose, spite your face. It's
exactly
just,
like you're trying to say BDS, stop, boycott, diverse, sanction, and then you take away the food out of your people's mouths. Like, hello, McFly, hello.
Well, Lynn just mentioned that because the peoples are threatened by the hard work that Jewish people do, and she mentions Hitler and Stigma. Yeah, but this goes back centuries. I mean, Eastern Europe has had horrific pogroms against Jewish communities for centuries. We see this over and over again, especially in the 18th century and the 19th century, in which thousands of Jews are murdered. It's akin to what happened to the Huguenots when the Edict of Nantes was revoked in 1680, excuse me, it started 1590. In 1680, the French king was jealous of the wealth and prestige of the highly successful Huguenot community, which was full of people who were upper class and succeeded in trades and businesses and banking and such, and agriculture. They revoked the Edict of Nantes, and tens of thousands of Frenchmen were butchered, raped, murdered overnight. When I say raped, this happened a lot by so-called civilized Catholics. They did this to the Protestants, to Huguenots, and that's why South Africa had an influx of Huguenots who contributed to the Afrikaner community, because they fled mostly to the Spanish Netherlands, which was controlled by Spain at the time, the Netherlands, which include Belgium and the Netherlands. And then from there, many of them relocated around the world to the U.S., to Berlin. And there were 50,000 of them that eventually wound up in Berlin, which actually wound up changing the German spoken in Berlin, because people brought French colloquialisms and brought French words in. And German spoken there is a bit odd if you speak modern German. You go there, you really have to pay attention. But the Huguenots came to South Africa as a consequence. So it's similar to that, the pogroms. But I mean, they would just wipe out entire villages, just go through villages in the Ukraine, Belarus, in Russia, and just start murdering Jews in the middle of the night, middle of the day. Raping, murdering, butchering, burning their businesses. And yes, Lynn, you're correct. It's a lot of people fear or envy the success. Now, a lot of people always have this question about why are Jews so heavily involved in finance? Why are Jews involved in art? Why are Jews involved in this? They control all these things. Well, my experience with people who are Jewish is that most Jewish people who identify as Jewish that I know have a very strong work ethic and have a cultural norm to achieve. Achievement is important. Now, that's not the case in the white trash neighborhoods I grew up in, parts of America, and also in the black communities I grew up in America. That's not a condemnation of whites or blacks in America. I'm just stating facts. I also grew up in places where achievement was highly valued by blacks and by whites. But the point here is that for me, it's probably not universal, but it's near universal in my experience for Jews in America, and when I was in Israel and in Tunisia, where I met Jews and other places, that there's a universal norm amongst the family unit to achieve something. Now, that's probably a stereotype and overstatement, but I don't think it's inaccurate. Ruth, any comments?
I think because, I remember reading up about, I think in the 1100s, a whole bunch of Jews were just rounded up in a forest somewhere, also in like the Black Forest in Germany, and just murdered. And I think because Jews have always had to look after themselves and make sort of like, if you constantly, it's like any small rodent, right? If you constantly in a state of like panic and fear for your life, you're going to try and do as best you can with what you have and save that and use it to better yourself, and I think I know education in Russia, the turn of the century, obviously just before the pogroms with Nicholas and all of that, education, if you didn't have an education was considered like the most important thing. And in Israel, ironically enough, doctors are not considered the highest paid. Everyone in Israel has a degree. You have to kind of be a science brain. In fact, someone like me there, I'd probably have to sweep floors just to make a living with my level of education. But your education was highly valued. And I think if someone's in constant threat of being taken out, you have to make provision for tomorrow. Yeah. You have to have things in place. There was a question here from Sean Mandich. It's sort of going back to the whose idea was it to put the Star of David on the flag instead of the menorah?
It's a good question, and it goes obviously back to the 40s, but I don't know who decided. Maybe Ben Gurion?
Yeah, I know with the Knesset, their coat of arms is the menorah.
Yes.
And if you go to the Knesset itself, there's this massive menorah that was also... But I don't know. I don't know
either. That's actually a very good question. But, to add to what you just said there, I think that there's an element which you stated, but let me just put it in a very clear phrase that makes sense to people. I think for Jewish communities, in which many places are oftentimes minorities and they're on the outskirts, of a city or something like that, Jewish communities, I think, oftentimes have felt under siege because of their situation. And that probably is a driving factor in why people seek to achieve. So they have the means to survive. And if they have to relocate or something like that, because you never know when it's going to happen. And we've seen it throughout history. I find it astounding that Jewish communities would continue to live in Eastern Europe when these pogroms would happen over the course of centuries, every few decades, and the horrific carnage that was done. It's probably just a consequence of the circumstances. People just had no options. They couldn't go anywhere else, but really frightening stuff. I mean, you look at Poland, you look at Belarus, you look at those two countries in particular, massive Jewish populations. All the way up until the Nazis took over, and then things kind of changed. But Ruth, I got to apologize. It's your program, and I got you off of you explaining something earlier. You started to explain this birthright thing. So are there private organizations that raise money so that Jewish people can go visit Israel? Is that what that's all about?
Yes. So it was for young people to maybe, obviously, I don't know how, I'd have to find out if it still exists. Obviously, with the Roro, and you call it the Rona. I know someone who calls it the Roro. It's changed the socioeconomic of flipping everything. So I have no idea. But I do know Israel's very open to not only for Jewish people to come and view Israel. There are a lot of programs where people from Christian denominations, I know Buthelezi took a tour of few of his members of parliament. They went to go and see. They were invited. So people can see what an apartheid state looks like.
Well, I'll tell you, whether you're a person of faith or a historian or just a tourist, a visit to Jerusalem is a highly emotional event. Of course, I went to the Wailing Wall, and it was obviously I'm not Jewish, but it was a very emotional and evocative moment in my life. And I'll never forget it. My experience of visiting Jerusalem, and as a Christian, not a particularly devout Christian, but a Christian, going to Bethlehem was incredible for me too. What an amazing experience visiting Bethlehem. But Jerusalem is a fascinating city with its different quarters for Jews, for Muslims. It's an amazing place. And the history is unbelievable. I mean, I'm walking around in Jerusalem with olive trees, or was it olive? I think it's that were planted before Christ was born. That's insane. That's you think these trees live for over 2,000 years that are planted around there, and it's before Jesus was even born. That's insane. I mean, when you think about it, it's mind-boggling. It's absolutely something else. I will never forget my experience in Israel. Not all of it was good, but that has nothing to do with the Israeli people. It had to do with a military event, but being stuck in an Israeli air base, for most of the time. But my experience in Eilat and at the Dead Sea, which really is dead, and shrinking by the hour, and also in Bethlehem, in Jerusalem. I would never trade that for anything. And it was just amazing. I think a lot of people get fixated and get lost. They think of, unless they're a person of deep faith in their own faith, they look at Jerusalem, they go, oh, it's where the Jews are. Well, it's also incredibly holy to the Muslims and to Christians, all three faiths, which all come out of the same origins. find Jerusalem be amazingly important historical site. Did you get a chance to get to Jerusalem?
Yes, of course. No, we spent the Sabbath there, which is the Friday night. So it's quite odd, because the one thing that you must remember when going to Israel, so everything closes except I think in Tel Aviv. But in Jerusalem, if you're in Jerusalem, and also you got to check when you go. Like now, if you'd gone, it wouldn't be fun because we've got a lot of Jewish holidays. Also, Easter time is also very intense. So the shops close like Friday night, Friday afternoon, and only open again Saturday night. So that's our Sabbath. But what is incredible is, I think also they say talking to God is like talking to a wall. Like there's that whole joke about standing in front of the Western Wall, because you talk to God and you expect him to like answer all your prayers, but you're literally standing in front of a wall. Haha.
No, I get it.
But no, it was very spiritual, and there's lots of, there are lots of sites. There are Christian sites. You can go to, the Sea of Galilee. You can go to where Jesus, like a lot of the places where Jesus, baptized people, and it's just beautiful. They've kept things so well, and they just want people to come and experience the culture and the tourism and the sites. It really is. I've got a question for viewers, right? And not allowed to Google. No Google. How big do people think Israel is? Because I get the feeling people think Israel, okay, I'm not going to give any hints. How big do you think Israel is? Is it the size of South Africa? Is it the size... is it the size of, say, a province, say, is the Western Cape?
No.
Anyone can answer. I don't know. First person wins something. I'll find something to send. But this is a huge misconception. When you finally tell people how big Israel is, they go, oh, really? So I don't know if anyone wants to give it a guess.
Yeah, it's from my perspective, having traveled the world, the size of a postage stamp.
Compared to the world.
Yep.
Roy Hayes says, and thank you everyone to all the positive comments. I can't read them all. My sister worked for an accounting firm in Baltimore. Last name was Abraham. Great people. Look, it's all good to blow a trumpet and say, yes, listen, I've worked for Israelis before when I was a student. It's not easy. They are not easy people. The world thinks, oh, Jews rule the world. Okay, well, if that's the case, how can we work 6 days a week in Israel? Surely if we ruled the world, we'd be taking holidays more often, or we'd work a 4-day week, right? And have a 3-day weekend. Hello. Your work week there is Sunday to Friday. That's the week. There is no 2-day weekend. Well, now they're sort of more relaxed with the Anglo-American influence. But it's like, it's not an easy place.
Well, I would tell you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. Well, I just wanted to say, and that's why I think a lot of people still living in the diaspora, or like here in South Africa, are fearful to go, because we're so used to our lives here that have the domestic worker that comes to clean, and life's plush, life's great. We have a 2-day weekend, public holidays. In Israel, things are not so easy.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a difference there. But, it's interesting because I worked with the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, and I did it for some period of time. Before I ever went to Israel, I always had this same size. Oh, joking. We won't put that up again. I work with them and on a daily basis. And before I ever went to Israel, I always thought of the Israeli Defense Forces as this Goliath, this incredibly well-trained, equipped, and ready and prepared military that could just defeat its neighbors at will. Having spent 4 months with them, I came to the conclusion that they weren't any of that. They were an average military, and that the reason that they always beat the Arabs is because the Arabs are completely incompetent. But my experience with the IDF was that they're just another military. They were built up in my mind from decades of learning about Israel that they were this super army. They weren't. Their discipline was lax. And their training was not up to standard that we had in our army. And I know because we work with them, they would do things in a very lackadaisical fashion. That's not an attack on the IDF. It's just that I was kind of surprised. I was expecting to find Superman army there. But here's the reason why Israel doesn't lose. Because if they lose, it's game over. It's all over. So when you fight for your very existence and you only have 30 kilometers before the other border is reached, you got to fight tenaciously. And I think that's why Israel's defense forces have been so successful in 48, 56, 67, 73, and then up to today. So anyway.
No, your knowledge is amazing. And it's just, that's the thing. I mean, anyone who wants to learn more, there's a great channel called Prager University.
Oh, yeah, they're fantastic. Yeah, here in the U.S.
Yeah. And learn more. So I just Googled the size of Israel. Okay, is everyone ready for it?
Okay.
So in square kilometers. Okay, someone says the states of Free State, the size of joking at
this. No, it's not the Free State. Not the Free State.
Someone said Gauteng size, and we can Google those too and see how big they are. So Israel's size is 22,145 kilometers square.
Yep.
Which
we have Native American reservations in the West that are larger than that.
Yeah. So let me just Google the size.
Well, while you're Googling that, I see that Erica said that what's a domestic worker? Sounds as though I'm missing out. You're not, Erica. Let me explain. Erica, you are the domestic worker.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know she's being facetious, but yeah, I never liked the idea of domestics. That the whole thing I found weird in Southern Africa, particularly in South Africa. So.
Okay, so I think Gauteng size, Henkloppe, Gauteng size is 18,176 kilometers.
So close.
Okay, but if you think an entire country that has just under, I think it's 9 million people now?
It's over 9 million. It's 9.3 million.
Yeah, is just bigger than the province of Gauteng. Yeah.
Well, and the other thing here too is that Gauteng is relatively consistent borders. It's kind of shaped, almost like an oblong, whereas Israel's like this, and big gaps and, and strategic, challenges. I mean, if the West Bank is not controlled by Israel, then the difference between the sea, the Mediterranean, and where they're at is really narrow. And you could cut the country in half by simply driving one battalion through. And yeah, so yeah, that's why they survive. It's game over. It's like watching Aliens, Hicks. Hey, man, I don't know if you keep it score. We just got our asses kicked, man. Game over, dude.
I love your Johnny Bravo alter ego. It's so cool. we need to actually, but Scan, I remember watching Chi Ching Chong when I was very young, and I actually want to watch it again. I think I'm going to this weekend.
No, it's really funny. Brett just said 85% of Israel's waste is treated in an environmentally sound manner. I'd be happy if they fed 85% of their waste to leftists. That'd make me pretty happy.
Oh, but ironically enough, Israel is very left. I don't know.
It's actually, someone asked a question earlier about the kibbutz, and that was a long time ago. My apologies. We can get it if you're still here listening. The thing on the kibbutz, and let me share this, and we'll get Ruth on this too. Is that that's a very socialist approach to doing things. Everyone coming together, communally owned, communally produced. Everyone does the same thing. It's almost like communism, and it's ironic because people look at Israel as a democratic, capitalist state. But in order to survive in its origins, the kibbutz were critically important. They were taking desert, which wasn't fertile and wasn't watered, to produce food, which is necessary to feed the huge influx of Jews coming from Europe and increasing the population rapidly. So ironically, Israel had a very socialist, leftist start, and it's considered to be a modern, democratic, capitalist society, not necessarily left or right, but it is ironic. So it's there's a lot of left leaning in Israel.
Yes, so I think the prize. Okay, so. Henkloppe definitely comes second best, but Nick Mueller, look at the emoji. It is the size of literally the Kruger National Park.
There you go.
I mean, I know it gets compared to that often, and I think it was also the state of Ecuador or something was also bigger than the state of Israel. So what's so amazing is that if there's ever a disaster, whether it's an earthquake, a tsunami, a drought, the Israelis are there. I don't know if you know this. They often have their stuff and their survival kits, and they're there on the ground, and they have many organizations, and they're just trying to, I don't know, spread the love.
Well, that may be the case, but what I have to say about Israel is that it's a multi-ethnic state, it's a multi-religious state, and it is a modern democracy in which anyone who lives there can participate. And I take great offense anytime I hear someone state a fact that's not true. It's not a fact. It's a lie. When they talk about Israel being an apartheid state or people being discriminated against, it's just simply not the case. And I think it's important for people to understand it because, well, it is the Jewish state, and that is a designation. There has been one backsliding thing that's happened recently, and I'm a little concerned about this, but I won't lose sleep over it, is that Arabic was an official language throughout Israel's history until 2018. In 2018, it was downgraded. It's no longer an official language. So it's no longer. So that to me is a problem. I'm concerned about that. I don't know if that's because of events or what the deal was, what precipitated that, but I don't think it's a strong position because the Arab speaking population of Israel is only going to increase as a percentage of the country as we go forward. The birth rates are off the charts high for Arabs compared to Jews and Christians in the country. So I don't really think it's a sound practice. But anyway, it's a multi-ethnic state. I'm tired of hearing that they can call it an apartheid state by people that don't know what an apartheid state is and don't know what history is. It's very frustrating.
It is very frustrating. That's my biggest, that is my biggest pet peeve. I just had an idea and it just popped out my head. I should have written it down. But the greatest thing is that I'm so grateful for you to be here. I'll think of it now. It was a question I saw. Let me just see here. Sorry, guys. What time is your night owl stream?
In about 9 minutes.
Yes. Okay, so I remembered it. I am like a fish. I go around the fishbowl and I forget, and then I go around again and I remember. But the greatest thing I think that happened us in the last couple of years was Mr. T, and you know who I'm talking about there. I don't even know, like Mr. Trump, who recognized Jerusalem as the capital, because for so many years the capital, all the embassies were in Tel Aviv. Right. And he basically moved the American embassy to Jerusalem and made it so that, and I think Czechoslovakia also moved their embassy, India.
Yep. Well, we actually had federal law that was over 3 decades old, which required our government to move our embassy to the capital in Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. And that was ignored by half a dozen presidents. Trump finally made it happen. Hey, Ruth, exactly. Are you able to bring images into the stream or no?
I can.
If you go to your WhatsApp, and then I've just given you an exclusive if we can get up before I have to go. This is an image of me in 1992 in southern Israel, not far from Eilat, if you can get in there.
I'll try and. Thing is, I don't have WhatsApp on this computer.
So maybe what you can do is the email. Oh, I see Ruth gets to see it, nobody else. Email it to your email real quick and then download it from there and then bring it up in the stream if you can.
Okay.
I don't know. Can I? Let me see. Maybe I can bring it in here. Let me see. Let me see. Let me just do this here. I want to
just talk about.
Oh, that's video. It doesn't let me do image. It does video.
Okay. So. Okay. Well, I'm going to try and share it. You are a young, very, very, very young looking. You had brown hair.
Yep.
There we go. Everybody, look at that.
That's in Israel, 1992.
1992. Because we've moved and we've changed PCs, but we will get something more. I'm going to say background and things. But thank you so much for being on and sharing your knowledge and your experiences with so many. And maybe once in a while we should have a part 2. No, I don't know. It's and as the things like. Apparently, there've even been rocket attacks now recently again.
Yeah.
But of course, you never hear about it. But yeah. All right, people.
Well, there's a question here before let me just get this. Joking that says, did the formation of Israel have a stabilizing or affect the Middle East or no? Ultimately, and this will probably fly in the face of conventional wisdom, I think it did have a stabilizing effect because had the Israelis been pushed into the sea and removed, I think the future of that region in the Levant would have been even bloodier and more chaotic as Syria, Egypt, and Jordan all jockeyed, and even Lebanon, to control that territory and wound up fighting each other. I think we would have seen far more carnage and death if there were not Israeli state, which people are going to be, are you high? There's constant wars. Well, there hasn't been a war since 1973. with the exception of going in Lebanon. That's a different story. But anyway, so there you go. So I just wanted to answer that question for Joking Atheists. So, okay, cool beans. All right, Ruth, thanks a lot for inviting me on. It's been my pleasure.
Excellent. Okay. Cheers, Chris. God bless.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Yeah, so hopefully you learned a little bit something extra from Colonel Chris. Yeah, and how's that photo of him? Who wants to see it again? I don't know how to share it on this computer. But yeah, who wants to see it again? Anybody? He looks like a real young, well, yeah, just incredible how people change. I don't know, can you see? Is that camera good? Yeah, young and strapping and climbing some, it looks like part of the Masada, which I actually went up Masada, took from 4 a.m. till I think just after 6. Long walk. But all right, guys, I think Chris Wyatt's going to stream, and I don't want to cut into his time. But thank you, Teresa. And thanks, everybody. We'll maybe try and stream on Thursday. I don't know, the week. Oh, no. In fact, Thursday is Yom Kippur, talking about the Yom Kippur War. I can't understand why the Middle East won't allow Israel to live in peace on their own land. Yeah, $1 million question, that. But thank you, Lynn. Dead sexy. Okay, dead sexy. Like the Dead Sea. No, I'm kidding. No, lekker, man. Excellent. Alrighty, people. So if we don't stream this week again, we'll see you next Tuesday. And I hope to have a South African surfer lady on. That should be fun. So join me then. Also, take care and enjoy the hot weather. Enjoy summer. Whoop, whoop. Yeah. Don't drink too much alcohol, and if you do, get smashed. All right. God bless. Cheers.